All right, welcome everyone. Great to have you here with us. This is our Science Entrepreneurship session as part of University of Oregon Startup Week, and I'm just delighted that we have this session tonight. My name is Andrew Nelson. I'm a professor at the Lundquist College of Business, and I also serve as Associate Vice President for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, working very closely with the Knight campus, which you see in an architectural rendering on this first slide, but is actually a real building right now. In fact, on December 2nd, we'll have our grand opening, and I'm broadcasting live from the Knight campus right now. So we'll put the building's Wi-Fi network to the test, if nothing else. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined for this session by Ruth Maust and by Avinash Singh. Ruth is a PhD student in chemistry at University of Oregon, and Avinash is a postdoc here at University of Oregon, and also founder of a company called Perceptivo, which operates, well, you'll hear more about that actually. I was going to steal a little of Avinash's thunder. So our plan for this session overall is pretty straightforward. I'm going to kick things off with a little bit of discussion about science entrepreneurship. What do we mean by that, and what are some of the myths or some of the special features that might accompany science entrepreneurship? Then I have some prepared questions for Ruth and Avinash, but I want to be sure that we leave some time for those of you in the live audience as opposed to the recorded one to get your questions in as well. So without further ado, entrepreneurship. What do we mean by innovation and entrepreneurship? And we could easily spend our full hour on this question. So I'm just going to toss out some baseline definitions to get us roughly on the same page. So definitions: an invention, a new product or process; an innovation, a new product or process with economic and or social impact. I think of it this way: we care about innovations, maybe less so inventions. Though of course one can lead to the other. Sometimes people measure these by looking at things like the number of patents that exist, but the reality is the vast majority of patents, more than 90%, actually have no economic value. They're never tied to actual products. They never have any impact on society. And so what we really care about is innovations, things that actually do have social and economic impact. And I would define entrepreneurship as the process of creating new innovations, and that's what we're going to talk about. Innovation and entrepreneurship are really a pretty straightforward activity, at least on the surface. The devil is in the details. But on the surface, really, innovators do two key tasks. They identify problems and they execute on solutions to those problems. But I would argue they have to do both of those tasks. If they only do the first one, maybe they are somewhat depressing to hang out with, but identifying problems alone is actually not acting as an innovator. And similarly, if one only executes on solutions but isn't grounded in what the actual problems are that they're addressing, they also are not acting as an innovator. At least I would argue. So I want to spend some time here focusing on what I would term myths of science entrepreneurship. My own background is that I work a lot with people like Ruth and Avinash and others, coming from a background in business, but working with scientists and engineers and helping them think about commercialization opportunities and entrepreneurial opportunities associated with their research. And what has struck me often in doing this work are the number of misconceptions that some people have about science entrepreneurship. So I put together 5 just to get us going, and then again, then we'll transition into the panel, and perhaps Ruth and Avinash will contradict everything I say, but here we go, for lack of something else. The 5 myths of science entrepreneurship. First is that science leads to technology, which leads to products, which leads to companies. That's actually not true. The second is that the best technology wins. The third is that great companies start with great ideas. The fourth is that entrepreneurs are rare people endowed with special gifts. And the fifth is that academic and commercial endeavors are at odds. So let me riff on each of these just a little bit. Our first myth here, that science leads to technology, leads to products, leads to companies. Sometimes scientists especially wish that were the case, because that would be a nice linear, smooth process. But the reality is actually the inverse of that. If we look at actual companies and we look at actual products, what tends to happen is that consumer needs or problems lead to product demand, which may lead to the search for a new technology, which might be built on scientific insights. One example of this is Uber. This is actually the content on this slide I got directly from the founders of Uber, and they published this in TechCrunch about 9 years ago. But their approach to starting this company was very much what you saw in an earlier slide. They started by saying, what are all the problems that we have? And then, as you'll see, they said, how can we solve these problems? How can we make them better? So the problem that Uber was addressing, it started in San Francisco, is how do you find a taxi in San Francisco? And they went through the process in detail. In order to find a car before the world of Uber, you had to stand on the street or you had to call, and it usually would take 15 or 30 minutes. This is their slide, so I didn't want to change it. In my experience living in San Francisco, that's a very low estimate, especially if it were the weekend. But this is annoying to have to wait that long and to have the uncertainty. In order to set the destination, you have to tell the driver where you're going, but perhaps you don't know the name of the street, you have the name of the restaurant, but you're not sure what the address is, and so on. You're not always sure what kind of ride you're going to get. There's a little bit of luck of the draw. Is it a nice cab or not? In order to pay, you're not sure if they take a credit card or not when you flag them down on the street, and then you have to figure out what kind of a tip you'll calculate. And what Uber did is simply to go through and say, these are a bunch of problems. These are our solutions to these problems. We're going to develop an app. Those of you who've used it are familiar with this. The app just uses the phone's built-in GPS. It knows where you are, and you don't have to know your address. You can copy and paste your destination out of your web browser on your phone. You don't actually have to know where you're going either. You have some guaranteed level of service. Your credit card is linked to your account to automatically pay, and at least in Uber's initial iteration, the tip was calculated for you and included in the fare. But the point of this example is that the starting point of Uber, which is very much a tech company, which relies on a lot of advanced technology ranging from GPS to advanced processing in your cell phone, was not the technology itself. It was by starting with the problem and then implementing technology as a solution to that problem. This is tied to the second myth of science entrepreneurship, which is that the best technology wins. As a former engineer myself, this always kills me, but empirically, if you look at the data, the best technology actually does not win, at least not always. So we have example after example of this. If you're old like me and remember video cassette recorders, the standard was VHS. It competed initially against Beta, which technically is a superior format, has better picture quality, better reliability, and enables more features. VHS won. Technical superiority does not mean you will win in the market. VHS won particularly because it had more rental, more movie titles and a better rental system. QWERTY versus Dvorak. If you've ever stared down, those of you on a computer looking at your keyboard and wondered, why is it arranged QWERTY on top? The answer is not because that's the most efficient arrangement for your keyboard. In fact, it was explicitly designed to slow down typists in the early days of typewriters. And alternatives, such as the Dvorak system for laying out keys, are demonstrably better. But even though they are technically better, they have not won in the market. Or a more recent example, if you look at the Segway, when the Segway came out, amazing gyroscopic technology, the marketing fluff around this was that it was going to change transportation forever. But the reality is that bikes, cars, and walking proved far more robust than Dean Kamen and Segway thought they were. So the point of this, particularly for those coming from science and engineering backgrounds, is that you shouldn't get too caught up in your technology because the market actually doesn't care how cool your technology is. What the market cares about is the problem that you solve. And actually, it only cares about your technology insofar as it solves that problem. Myth number 3, great companies start with great ideas. This should actually be an inspiring thing, because if this were true, it would mean you shouldn't conduct as an entrepreneur unless you had a great idea to start off with. But the reality, if you look again at the data surrounding startup companies, is that most entrepreneurs' initial ideas stink. And you can look at this across companies. You know, PayPal is one of my favorites. If you look at the origin story of PayPal, it was doing Palm PDA data transfers over an infrared interface. Absolutely nothing like PayPal as we know it today, working in digital currency and enabling e-commerce. The reality is that that's true of most startups. If you look at their initial idea, it was not a very good one. The corollary to this is what distinguishes really successful science entrepreneurs is actually not the quality of their idea, but instead their ability to learn and adapt. So when we teach entrepreneurship, we often use diagrams like this, that it's not the top arrow you see here, where you have your idea, you have your initial scientific insight or breakthrough, and you simply execute on it in a linear fashion. Instead, entrepreneurship looks like this bottom diagram. It's topsy, it's turvy, you're never sure if you're making progress or not. And what enables you to be successful is to learn. This is actually where scientific language can be really helpful. Scientists are used to speaking in terms of hypotheses, and then gathering data and testing those hypotheses. And the reality is science entrepreneurship is exactly the same process. If you have an idea for a new business, whether it's Uber or PayPal or simply a corner bakery that you want to start, you have a bunch of hypotheses attached to that. You're assuming that the variety of goods that you want to provide are the right variety of goods that the market wants. You're assuming your price point is the right price point. You're assuming that the way you're going to arrange the decor in this coffee shop you want to establish is the right kind of decor and the right way to arrange it, and so on. You have dozens, if not hundreds, of hypotheses. And the process for developing a company is then gathering data, testing those hypotheses, some of which won't pan out, and then adjusting your idea accordingly. So this is a way in which really the entrepreneurial process is very much like the scientific process. It's a matter of identifying hypotheses, gathering data, and then reflecting on what it is that you've learned. Almost done here because I do want to get to our panelists. They are the highlight, and they'll reflect more on these myths and realities, I expect. But myth number 4 is that entrepreneurs are rare people endowed with special gifts from the outset. And this particular myth is a pernicious one. It's a really unfortunate one because I think it makes people think they can't be entrepreneurs. And the reality, if you look at entrepreneurs, is that really anyone can act as an entrepreneur. And given our audience, I feel it's especially worthwhile to point out that most entrepreneurs do not have MBAs. And you might say, well, maybe the most successful ones have MBAs. Even that's not true. In fact, I'd encourage you, go look at all the startups which have IPO'd over the past 20 years and look at the founding teams. And you will find that most of them do not have MBAs. In fact, more of them have technical backgrounds than have business backgrounds. This is not to beat up MBAs. I teach MBAs and I love them dearly and I think that's valuable. But it's to point out that entrepreneurs are not somehow special people with a special degree, pedigree, or some kind of special risk tolerance. Instead, entrepreneurship is something that can be learned. Or to put it succinctly, entrepreneurs, they're not born, they're made. And there's a whole process for how you can make an entrepreneur. But scientists, absolutely. If you can learn biochemistry, if you can learn advanced photonics, if you can learn many of the things that scientists learn, entrepreneurship's easy. Entrepreneurship is very much something you can do. And the last myth here that I want to come to is that somehow academic and commercial endeavors are at odds. And this is something we often see in a university environment where people think, I'm at a crossroads. I have to decide, am I going to be an entrepreneur or am I going to pursue a research career? It actually is not the case that you have to do either or. The reality is that these are actually complementary. Now, at this point, when I present this to scientists, they often raise their eyebrows and they say, really? Show me the data, because when I see what I experienced in my life is I could put in a few more hours in the lab running an experiment, or I could put in a few hours doing market research, but there's an absolute trade-off. And there is a trade-off in how you spend in a given hour. There is not a trade-off in the way that your career evolves. This is something that economists and social scientists like myself have spent a lot of time investigating. So I'm going to put up here some studies to try to convince you, which go back almost 20 years. The first was done at MIT faculty, where they found that patenting did not dampen publishing rates. That is, MIT faculty with lots of patents were still publishing just as much as everyone else. Paula Stefan and her colleagues said, well, let me look at recent doctoral recipients, different population than MIT faculty who maybe are special. But she found actually patenting and publication were positively correlated. Those with more patents also had more publications, not fewer. They were more productive at basic research, not less productive. Kira Fabrizio and her co-author decided to look at this among a different set of universities, and once again found the positive correlation. Pierre Azoulay and his colleagues said, you're all looking at individual universities or samples of graduate students. I'm going to run a massive panel and see if this correlation holds. And once again, it held. And at this point, actually, most economists threw up their hands and said, well, I guess this actually must be true. So the data here say that pursuing academic entrepreneurship and pursuing these kinds of interests are not something which needs to derail you from an academic career. In fact, if you look at these positive correlations, they're something that can actually fuel an academic career. And this is a point that we often make at the night campus. And so I started off describing the night campus and our grand opening coming up here on December 2nd. One of the images we use here is what we've termed the impact cycle. And you'll notice it's a cycle, it's cyclical, it's not a linear process. And so we move from inquiry to insight, to an innovation, to the social impact that that innovation has. But then we bring back around how that impact can fuel further inquiry. And I look at stories of this right here at University of Oregon. People like Darren Johnson, who's a chemistry professor, developed a company based on his research. One of his graduate students took that company forward. It eventually was acquired. But what's really interesting is the company that acquired Darren's startup is now investing in Darren's subsequent research in his lab. So it's supporting new graduate students of Darren's, and Darren now has an idea for a new startup company coming out of this. And this is the way in which entrepreneurship is very cyclical. It's supporting his basic research, it's supporting his graduate students, and yet it also is having a tremendous commercial impact. So with that foundation laid, I wanna now stop talking so much and turn over to our panel, because what we have here are two individuals who've graciously volunteered to join us, and they have each experienced this directly. Both Ruth Maust, who's again a PhD student in chemistry, and Avinash Singh, who's a postdoc and founder of Perceptivo, went through a program that we run here called Lens of the Market. And this is a program explicitly designed to investigate the commercial application of research. So I'm going to jump out of my slides here. I'll quickly flash up a website and an email in case you want to see that. But I'm going to jump out of my slides now, and I just have several questions for Avinash and Ruth, and then I want to shift it over and open up questions for the audience. But the place to start is first of all with a thank you, a big thank you to Avinash and Ruth. And I'm going to go ahead and looks like Avinash is unmuted and Ruth is not, so I'm going to ask her to unmute, to use my my power here as facilitator. Maybe if each of you could start, and let's start with you, Ruth. What's your background, and what are some of the key questions your research focuses on?
So, like Andrew said, my name is Ruth, and I'm currently pursuing my PhD in chemistry. So I'm a chemist. My research is focused right now on making new kinds of carbon materials. So some materials you may be familiar with related to carbon would be like diamond and graphite, which is pencil lead. And the difference between those two things happens on the atomic level. So my research is trying to make new materials from carbon that have a totally different structure at the atomic level. That research is very, very exploratory, which makes it interesting, exciting. It's pretty new, but that also means it doesn't have necessarily an end goal or an end specific application. It is about the fundamental questions. So some of these things that are going to be about entrepreneurship and thinking about the problem first and then finding the solution, I would say is a little bit far away from the very basic research that I'm actually currently pursuing, but definitely something I am interested in and have tried to find ways to learn that aspect as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Ruth. Avinash, can you tell us a bit about your background and your research?
Sure. I am a neuroscientist. I study how the brain works. Specifically, how is it that changes in the brain elicit changes in behavior? That's the fundamental basis or the fundamental idea in neuroscience, is that it is our brain that drives everything. And so how is it that our brain produce changes in our motor patterns, produce speech, produce movement, walking, whatever have you. And my specific area of interest is hearing. How do we perceive the world around us? Specifically the world that's created by sounds that mix with each other and ultimately all go through just two inputs into our brain, and then our brain has to reconstruct the world of sound around us. And my research in the Takahashi lab focuses on spatial hearing. How does a brain figure out where a sound is coming from, and how does it keep track of all the sounds that belong to, for example, one person? If you have a group of people talking, you can always figure out who's saying what, and if you get bored of somebody, you can switch your attention to someone else. And even though their words are getting mixed in a stream that's entering your ears, our brain is able to separate those out. And that's our basic research. And for that, we work with owls, because barn owls are very good at hunting using sound alone. So they can absolutely figure out where the sound is coming from just from a leaf rustling while they're flying around. And it turned out that purely by accident, I made a discovery, which was that when something changes in the environment, the owl's pupils would dilate for a very short time. And so that was a discovery, an involuntary behavior that we applied to figure out a lot of things about how owls perceive the environment. But it struck me that here's a technique that we could probably apply to humans. Now, if I want to check a human subject's hearing, most of the time all you need to do is to ask them, hey, did you hear the sound, or did it sound different? But there's one group of people with whom you cannot do that, and those are infants. And so it struck me that here was a way we could figure out whether or not infants heard something. And that research has progressed to a point where we are now hoping to create a test to detect hearing loss in infants. Yep, that's my general area of research.
You're both doing such fascinating work. I'm curious, you've each had experience with the Lens of the Market program. For the sake of those joining us, can you say a bit about the program? How does it work, and what was your experience like in it? Avinash, let's begin with you this time.
Well, my research, my experience was actually pretty good, partly because Ruth and I were on the same team, and Ruth is a very disciplined person, whereas I learned a lot from working with her. So Lens of the Market is a program that or that's designed to teach basic scientists like me and Ruth how to apply their research towards commercialization, or essentially learn about market research. And that was sort of interesting to me because, hey, we are scientists. What do? We are trained in only one thing, that's learning new things. And so I was like, hey, let's see if it works. And really it was fascinating because it was a completely new field of endeavor. I knew nothing about it. And it was a very fun learning experience. It is taught by an amazing person, Judy. I had a very positive learning experience, and what I basically learned was recapped in those slides that Andrew showed you, and which sort of turned my world upside down, because I was, exactly as Andrew said, used to thinking about science, work really hard, polish up a product, then take it around and see if someone's willing to buy it. But of course, it was a pretty eye-opening experience, and obviously self-evident that I can work and produce a perfect product, but that no one may buy it. So the idea that you start at the other end, you say, well, this could potentially be a product, and instead of wasting 10 years trying to develop it into a commercial product or a near commercial product, let me go around and figure out, see if someone's actually interested or not. And fortunately, my research was at a point where I could visualize what it could do. And so I went around, as part of a project, asking people who work with infant hearing and asked them, hey, here's what I'm thinking of doing. Would this be of interest to you guys? And as it turned out, it was. And so that was the starting point for a lot of work, for a lot of grants, and a lot of research that's happened since then. So that really took my career in a very different direction. And the Lens of the Market program is basically the foundation of what I hope to be doing over the next few years.
That's wonderful. Ruth, what was your experience like?
Yeah, so I would echo the part about trying to look for the problem first, seeing what the needs are. That was, I think, the main focus of the training, doing research into what we can find online, in the literature, and also especially calling people, finding people on LinkedIn and talking to them, asking them, if this product were to exist, would you be interested? What would you need it to look like? What kind of value could it have for you? And that's a very different approach, yeah, from the everyday scientific research of, hey, I was trying this out, something worked or didn't work, I'm going to go from there and see. And part of that program, we actually got to work on several different topics and kind of do some market research on each one. Some of those were a little bit related to my research, others not at all. But it was pretty cool to learn how to, reach out to people and gain firsthand information about different market areas that I didn't necessarily know about previously, and learn about what the needs are and also what the needs aren't. So, with my research, you always want to, when you're talking to scientists, you always want to say, these are the potential applications. But a lot of times that's some buzzwords or things that are way down the line. And if you actually would go out there and look for those things, does somebody want that? Not necessarily. So that's maybe not something to spend a whole lot of time on in research, thinking, oh, maybe this will be perfect for this. If that's not actually something that's needed. I think it was a pretty good experience. I think initially it seemed like something that could just be done on the side, and eventually it was like, oh, this is a serious, this is a lot of work, but in a good way. It was a different type of certainly work from the everyday being in lab and running experiments.
Yeah, I mean, as Ruth said, one of the amazing things was actually learning how to talk to people, because, many scientists are pretty absorbed in what they do. And so what I wasn't really good at is just blindly calling people and talking to them, striking up conversations. And that certainly was a skill that we learned. I'm very fond of reading books by Malcolm Gladwell, and he always says that the probability of your success is proportional to the size of your network. And my network was pretty darn small before we, worked on the projects in the lens of the market, and just learning how to talk to people. And after that, going to many conferences where I got a chance to talk to people who were in marketing or ran, venture funds and so on. It was quite a learning experience, just being able to just going up to anybody and in a couple of minutes describing what you do. And one of the amazing trainings was just describing in a sentence or 3 paragraphs what a product is about. That was a lot of work. But hey, we got pretty good at it.
It's excellent. It sounds like both of you had that experience of contacting complete strangers, describing ideas to them, and truly being open to their feedback, which
absolutely.
Which can be
part of it, I'll just add that with my research, at least, it's pretty open-ended. Like I said, it's very exploratory. So there's not necessarily like set deadlines, or I'm making my own goals, my own deadlines based on how the research is going. With this, it was like you talk to people as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, and you're trying to get to even if it's sort of ambiguous data that you're working with, trying to get to an answer as soon as possible to say, this is either worth pursuing or it's not. And we need to know by this time. And if it's not, we're going to switch to something else. If it is, we can continue, but not letting things just drag on forever, because you can keep going on and finding more and more information, but it may not be really relevant to the question.
Yeah, we often use this phrase in entrepreneurship of fail fast forward. And the idea is, failure is not a problem. In fact, failure is to be expected, but you want to fail quickly and then move on instead of having a long drawn out failure, which could be a problem. Avinash, I'm curious, so you're pushing Perceptivo further, and you've had some recent fundraising success. Can you say a bit more about where things are today with your idea and your startup?
Yeah, so we, after we talked to a bunch of people and through the lens of the market, and after we collected some data which suggested that there was in fact going to be a demand for this product, we worked with the University Innovation Partnership Services and set up a company that we call Perceptivo. And, as always, the question is, we have an idea and we're willing to make it work, but how do we get the money to pay for it? And because especially in this case, it involves research, further research, working with babies to test that our core ideas are sound. And of course, equipment and paying salaries and stuff. And one of the common pathways, which is open to scientists, is a grant called the SBIR, or the Small Business Innovation Research Grant. And that's one of the reasons I love this country. You work hard, you come up with an idea, and then the government pays you, gives you money. It isn't a loan; it's a research grant, and then you use that to develop your idea. And if it works, and if you can show them it works, they give you even more money to set up a company, build a prototype, and that's where I am now. We applied for a grant, which the probability of success for which is pretty low, but I managed to get it the first time. And I think a significant reason for that was all the data that we collected during Lens of the Market, because we didn't have to hypothesize why the idea would be attractive. We just built a table and cited the number of audiologists and the number of auditory researchers we talked to. We were able to say that, X number of them said, hey, this is an excellent idea and we really want this product. And we had some concrete ideas on what the parameters would be. And so that was really easy data that already existed after we completed Lens of the Market. And so we got an SBIR grant that's going to work, that's going to allow us to work over the next year to 18 months. To build a small prototype, to get some proof of concept data. And the hope is that that will allow us to apply for a larger grant, which will actually get us to the point where we can develop a commercial product, get it approved by the FDA, and be ready for testing and marketing. We also use the same data to apply to a foundation, the Murdoch Foundation, and they liked our ideas too, so they gave us money to work on the prototype. All of this was spurred not just by the Lens of the Market, but also by the university itself. The university has a venture development fund, which it parcels out small amounts to people to develop ideas that might be commercialized. And that was huge because essentially it paid for my salary for several months so that I could concentrate on that work instead of, finding hours and minutes every day to work on that project. As Ruth said, the work we do is interesting and fascinating by itself, and it's really hard to tear yourself away from that to work on commercialization, especially if we don't have the money to pay for our salary for that time. And so this sequence of events that was basically sparked by the Lens of the Market and underwritten initially by the university for a short while has led to a couple of grants that will fund our research for the next couple of years, hopefully positioning us very well going forward. And one of the things it lets us do is at a relatively low risk, especially financial risk to us and all the people who are involved in the company, carry out proof of concept testing of the data so that, before we go into huge funding cycles, we already know that the things work. And so that's, I think, is a fantastic outcome. And in this, otherwise terrible year, I think it's been a series of good news after the other.
Well, it's terrific. It speaks well to both your science and your entrepreneurial abilities to bring those together. So congratulations.
Well, thank you.
But my last question for both of you is simply, what advice would you give a graduate student or a postdoc who's curious about innovation and entrepreneurship? What would you tell them? Ruth, let's start with you, please.
I would tell them just to look for opportunities of things that are teaching these skills. So I participated in Lens of the Market, like we talked about. Actually, before I did Lens of the Market, I was part of what's called Sustainable Invention Immersion Week, which is just a week-long, super intense, collaborative, team-based program about coming up with some invention and just the very basics of these sort of skills of thinking about how would you come up with a product idea. So there are those opportunities. One of the things that came up that week was, you don't necessarily need to wait to start a company. Maybe the right time is now. I'm like, well, I'm pursuing a 5-year degree. I kind of want to finish that, but I think it's still definitely doable and worthwhile to find out about these kinds of events and opportunities and participate as much as you're able. Whether you're in business and want to learn more about the science entrepreneurship part, or want to learn about, how do you tell if the science is legit, that you could actually use it for a product, or if you're on the science side and you want to learn more about the business side. I know there are other outlets as well, and I would just say take advantage of those things.
Excellent, thank you. Avinash, what advice would you give?
Well, I mean, since I stumbled into Lens of the Market purely by accident, I think my best advice would be to just try things out. Things that you think sound interesting can sometimes be very useful. I think one of the biggest things I learned from the Lens of the Market is to have a large network. Try and talk to people, try and explore possibilities with them, and even more critical is try to keep in touch with them. And of course, the Lens of the Market is a fantastic program. I don't know that it's optimal for undergraduates, or at least not for undergraduates in their early years. But it's great for grad students and postdocs. I think what you need to do is to convince your faculty that it's a worthwhile program. And if they come and talk to people like Andrew and myself, I think we can give them enough reasons why it's useful. I mean, one of the things that Ruth mentioned in passing was that every time you apply for money, every time you apply for a grant, a basic research grant, there's a section in there which asks for potential applications. And most of the time what we write in it is, bullshit, basically. We just come up with some ideas and shoot the breeze, and it doesn't actually mean anything. But an investment in time in something like the Lens of the Market means what you put in there is totally believable, and that it may help drive your research in a completely different direction. Not just that, it is our nature for basic research scientists to keep working on a problem, trying to perfect it. And regardless of how much you tell a person, hey, this may not be the best approach, until you actually immerse yourself in learning, even for a short time, just the core concepts of the kind of things that Andrew is telling you about, it doesn't really fully sink in. I mean, I'm one of the researchers who 20 years used to believe that nothing should ever be patented because it should stay in the public domain. And I was fortunate enough to meet a friend who explained to me that if you have a brilliant idea that's in the public domain, it may never see the light of day because no one would invest money on it for fear that another company is going to work on the same thing and bring the product to market, 2 months before they're ready. And so that sort of helped me change my mind. And one of the great things about the university is that not just the Knight Center and its associated programs, but Kate is set up a new entrepreneurship major, I think, or is it minor, or entrepreneurship program in the School of Business. So if any of you are interested, the thing to do is to shoot her an email and see how you can work with her to, to be better informed about the subject. In addition, Andrew pointed us towards the Innovate website on the Knight Center, and I think it's innovate.uoregon.edu, right? I mean, that has a series of talks, and some of them are really fascinating. They're talks not about hardcore business, but they are about innovation, and some of those are by local entrepreneurs. And there's a similar series of talks from the Innovation Partnership Services on Wednesdays. And those are pretty amazing as well. Those can be, for example, women entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs in the local area who've got companies that are around us with whom you can seek out opportunities to work as interns or volunteers. And all of those things will help you learn more about entrepreneurship and innovation.
That's terrific. Thanks. And I want to echo the shout outs to Kate Harmon. Kate was instrumental in really the key player in the Sustainable Invention Immersion Week, which Ruth had mentioned, and as Avinash mentioned, is pushing a lot of our cross-campus programs as well, including it's an undergraduate entrepreneurship minor. But right now with our colleagues at the Lundquist Center for Entrepreneurship, we're developing some new graduate programs. We have an MBA specialization already, but we're hoping to roll out a cross-campus graduate specialization and perhaps a one-year master's as well. So lots of good things happening. We try to capture them as much as we can on the innovate.uoregon.edu website. But I think it's a good sign actually that it's challenging for us to even stay on top of all that. We do have some time left, and I want to give the opportunity for those in the live audience to ask questions if you have them. I think the way to run this is to use the chat function. So if you do have a question you'd like to raise, simply note that in chat, and then I will enable you to unmute. We'll give it just, we may not have questions either, which is just fine, but we'll give it just one more minute. Okay, I think it sounds like we have blown away our audience with with the thoroughness of the remarks here. So let me actually bring things to a close there. Oh, actually, I take that back. Chris Dunbar has a question here. Being an undergraduate interested in some career involving entrepreneurship in the sciences, what kind of study is recommended? Avinash or Ruth, do you want to take a first stab at that question? I'm happy to chime in as well.
Ooh, I think Kate might be the best suited to give that advice, but I think one of the critical things to remember is, like Andrew said, you don't really need a detailed or a comprehensive education to be an entrepreneur. I think what you need is, it's amazing how many, all these stories about people who founded Facebook and Microsoft and Apple, and all of them seem to have dropped out in their second year in college and set up a company. So it's not, I don't think it's critical to have a formal education. What is critical, I think, is to have some understanding or take some courses or attend some sort of training that gives you some understanding of the area of science you are interested in, or market research and those kind of things. I don't necessarily know that you need to take too many courses, but if you do, I think Kate is just the perfect person to answer that kind of question.
I agree. Kate, I will try to unmute the right instance of you here. Kate oversees our undergraduate programs at the Lundquist Center for Entrepreneurship. Do you want to add anything on the advice that you would give Kate?
Whoops.
Maybe that our microphone is not working here. Let's see. Looks like it may not be working. Chris, I would echo some of what Avinash said. I mean, really, what we try to do with our programs is almost take it's like a buffet approach. And so it goes from very easy, drop into a speaker sometime and hear what they have to say about the path that they took for their particular company, or check out one of the, this is where Kate could correct me, I think we now have 5 different student groups focused on various aspects of entrepreneurship. Pop into some of their meetings and connect with them, or take one of our formal courses. Or you can then go through the more formal, taking the entrepreneurship minor, different ways to engage. So there's really just a variety of ways. I think maybe I hear Kate coming in now. Kate, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Technical challenges as always. My whatever. But no, I don't have much to add to what Avinash had said. And Chris, I think I just would amplify what Avinash said, is that you don't have to major in business to be entrepreneurial. A lot of our students have found great success just doing the kind of programs and events that like Sustainable Invention or other kind of events that help students get engaged with entrepreneurship. And so those are things that you can do, you know, as a science major through programming, co-curricular programming, or also we do have an entrepreneurship minor, which is really easy for an environmental science student like yourself to do if you'd like. So feel free to hit me up online at the Innovate website, and I'd be happy to talk to you personally.
Great.
Oh,
Thank you.
also, I think Chris added to his question, which was how you can explore different problems that could have innovative solutions. And I think, I mean, again, this is probably my personal bias because, you know, I'm a scientist and I've been immersed in one kind of problem for a very long time. But I think it's much easier to see problems and possible solutions with things that you know reasonably well, or that you encounter personally. And so if you really want to look at areas that where you might come up with a solution, my suggestion would be to learn a little more about that. You know, and it could be, doesn't need to be science, you know, like that problem that Andrew showed you that Uber dealt with. That was something they encountered in their daily lives, not necessarily an area of academic study. I also think that one potential shortcut to a lot of these things is that once you have a network of people who are entrepreneurs or have been entrepreneurs in the past, what you will find is that people in this area are extraordinarily helpful. I've had a lot of people give me a leg up, and I know that there are people who spend a lot of time mentoring emerging businesses and emerging entrepreneurs. And if you have an idea, it's really easy to bounce it off of someone and see if there is, you know, any potential in it. And most of the time, people are really helpful.
Something to just add on to that, or these questions. So like with that Sustainable Invention program, for example, there are students from design, from the sciences, from business, from all different majors. And one of the cool things about that and about other things that are similar is you get to talk to people about like you're brainstorming problems with people who are not in your immediate field. And I think that's super helpful for coming up with solutions to things. So for me, for example, my everyday routine, I'm basically talking to other chemists, and we're sort of all in the same way of thinking about the same types of problems, which are very narrow problems, if I can say it that way. So I think if you get the chance to have these discussions with people who are in other fields, it doesn't necessarily matter what your field is or what your background is. I think a great way to start finding solutions to things is to talk to people in other areas as well.
Excellent. Chris is, you're on fire. This is great. Excellent. Lots of questions. So our next question, how much do you need to progress in an idea before seeming credible to other entrepreneurs when networking? Or does such a thing not even exist?
Think of that diagram that Andrew showed with the like super wavy arrow. If you have an idea, start bouncing it off people. And if they're like, this part makes sense, this part doesn't make sense, that's how you start refining the idea. And you may end up with something very different from what you started with, but that is part of the process. So as soon as you have something that you're excited about, or you're thinking, hey, this may work, start talking to people and see if, you know, if they immediately shoot you down, you're like, okay, maybe this wasn't the brilliant idea I thought it was, or maybe there's some potential here.
Yeah, I would just echo that. There's an interesting thing. I think sometimes we're trained to think of experts as people who know everything or know more than most everyone else. But the real skill in entrepreneurship is being able to learn quickly rather than knowing everything from the outset. So just to echo what Ruth is saying, I mean, it's not seeming to know everything possible before you go talk to anyone so you seem credible. It's really being open to hearing the input of other people and able to absorb that quickly and act on it. Excellent. Well, I feel like, Chris, we should have made you an honorary additional panelist. Those are really excellent questions. And I'd really like to thank our other panelists, Ruth and Avinash, as well as Kate, for hosting this. Sorry for my hand waving here. I mentioned I'm in the night campus and people are coming in now for a 6 p.m. filming that we're doing. But just an absolute pleasure to see both of you again and really admire the work that you've done. So thanks to everyone on this. And please check out the remainder of our UO Startup Week activities as well. That's at startupweek.uoregon.edu. We have some great things coming up both tomorrow and Friday.
Thanks so much, Andrew and Kate, for hosting and organizing.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.